Committee members, if you could take your seats, we will begin today's meeting. The clerk has advised me we have a quorum, and everybody appearing virtually has been sound tested. With that, I call this meeting to order. I call the meeting to order. Thank you. Welcome to meeting number 133 of the Standing Committee on Human Resources, Skills, Social Development, and the Status of Persons with Disabilities. Today's meeting has taken place in a hybrid format. All witnesses have completed the required connection test in advance of the meeting. All have been briefed on how to ensure they are participating in the official language of their choice. For those in the room, please, you can choose the interpretation from the headset you have. As well, I would advise any members in the room to check their devices and make sure alarms are turned off so that we do not have an issue with the interpreters. As well, please refrain from tapping on the microphone boom as it can cause issues for the interpreters. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on October the 8th, 2024, the committee is commencing its study of workers in the seasonal industry and the employment insurance program. Madame Chabot, nous commençons votre étude.
Ms. Labot will begin your study.
With witnesses in the first round, we have Ms. Lynn Siros, Chief Executive Officer, Action Chômage at Côte-Nord, by video conference. Mr. Paul Pinchbeck, President, Chief Executive Officer, Canadian Ski Council. And Mr. Ferdinand Thibodeau, Spokesperson, Seasonal Workers Help and Support. And I would ask each one of the two clarify the correct pronunciation of your name if I made an error. Each of you will have 5 minutes for your opening statements, followed by questions from the committee members.
Qu'est-ce que vous dites, monsieur?
Pardon?
Là, je suis sur audio.
Where's that coming from?
It's one of the witnesses. You can tell him that we'll have
We will have IT call you. It must be Mr. Thibodeau. We'll begin, each of you, as I indicate, will have 5 minutes to give your opening comments. We will begin with Madame Siro for 5 minutes, and please, I will advise you when your 5 minutes is over so that you can conclude your comments. So, Madame Siro, with 5 minutes, please. Madame Siro, you're on mute.
Okay.
Thank you. Well, good morning. My name is Lise Serrois, and I'm representing Action Chômage Côte-Nord, which is a citizens organization founded in November 2003. It was created to defend the rights of workers on the North Shore who, for various reasons, need a social safety net of employment insurance to meet their basic needs. To this end, over the past 20 years, our organization has undertaken to bring together the jobless of Côte-Nord region, particularly those working in seasonal industries such as commercial fishing, forestry, peatlands, bioresources, recreation, tourism, accommodation, food services, outfitting, excursions, and others. Our goal is to help and support them in their dealings with Service Canada, inform them of their rights, and support them in their claims. Now, let's stop talking about seasonal workers because we're talking about seasonal industry workers. The government needs to adopt a vision in which the company is targeted and not the seasonal employee, not the employee as the seasonal worker. Given the unique climatic variations of our immense country, seasonal industry is an inherent reality for the Canadian economy. Seasonality of employment is a characteristic feature of certain specific industries, forestry, agriculture, tourism, etc. According to a study commissioned by Action Chômage and carried out by Sigma Research, around a quarter of the active population of our upper North Shore region work in one or the other of these various sectors. In some areas of the country, it's estimated that more than a third of available jobs is seasonal. What's more, according to Sigma Research, 21.5% of these seasonal jobs are part-time, mostly held by women. As a result, women are far more likely than men to be affected by the notorious EI black hole, that is, a period of up to 18 weeks without any benefits. The employment insurance system is still struggling to adapt to this reality. Year after year, thousands of workers are confronted with this black hole. While year after year, many workers remain to the same seasonal job, the number of hours required to qualify for EI benefits and the number of weeks of benefits to which they are entitled vary according to the regional employment rate. But the unemployment rate, and therefore the benefit rate, is calculated according to the number of hours worked in a given region. If, in a certain regions, we have large industrial, mining, or hydroelectric facilities with high unemployment, seasonal industry workers have to work more hours than those living in a region with little or no large-scale industry. So, for example, the seasonal unemployment rate in the upper North Shore is similar to that of Gaspésie, yet the level of benefits is lower than in Gaspésie due to the presence of major industrial facilities in the Fermont sector. As things stand today, you have to work longer hours to qualify in certain regions that are similar in socioeconomic and or demographic terms, while seasonal jobs are limited in time. It's a vicious cycle. In the light of the above, it's clear that regional unemployment rate is in no way reflects the reality of seasonal industry workers. We can also conclude that the very principle of redrawing the administrative map of regions of the unemployment insurance system doesn't work. The plan should reflect regional realities, but it does not. Therefore, people are leaving. Did you know that the North Shore is the only region in Quebec to report a decline in population? The shortcomings of the unemployment insurance system are no stranger to this situation. The question of seasonal industry bears witness to an incongruity in the law. Various pilot projects have modified or revoked in recent years by the federal government have failed. The flawed system is fraught with pitfalls and administrative complexities designed, it seems, to discourage service providers. In Miagani, for example, not only do you have to work more hours to qualify, but you have to prove, for example, that you've submitted 3 claims in a row to be recognized as a seasonal industry worker. Absence is out of the question, whatever the justification, emergency or imponderable or impervisible. The system as it stands does not promote social equity. It's unfair, biased, and seems intent on punishing regional workers in sectors such as restaurants, commercial fisheries, outfitters, and others. The approach is so brutal that last year 3 fishermen were wrecked and lost their lives in the lower North Shore. According to the former mayor of Blanc-Sablon, these workers have been encountered bad navigation conditions. The only solution that we can have is to go through these dry periods. Has been proposed many times. The government has all assets to help them out and to improve.
Time has gone over. You can continue when you answer questions. We will now move to Mr. Pinchbeck for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. The opportunity to come before you all today is very much welcomed by our ski areas from coast to coast to coast. A little bit about my organization. The Canadian Ski Council is the national association that represents the interests of alpine and cross-country ski areas in Canada. Our mission is to assist in growing the snow sports industry in Canada through consumer-facing programs that encourage all Canadians to enjoy the physical and mental well-being that comes from year-round outdoor activity. We also have a mandate to support our industry with research and data gathering, education, and other supports that enhance their business acumen and success. Just to open today's meeting, I think it's important to set the stage on Canada's ski areas. We have 240 active ski areas located in all 10 provinces and 3 territories. We are a national body. More than 2.5 million Canadians actively skied or snowboarded last season, and the resulting economic impact, a little over $5 billion to Canada. In a normal year, over 2 million of our 21 million skier visits come from the United States and international destinations, making us also a large part of winter tourism success for Canada. One of the large challenges that we have is that ski areas in Canada are often described as large corporate-owned entities, and in truth, nothing could be further from the truth, as the bulk of Canadian ski areas are in fact privately owned small and mid-size enterprises across the country. Turning to the topic at hand, the story of seasonal workers in our business mirrors the very nature of Canadian ski areas. Our ski areas are labor and capital-intensive businesses. Ski areas are also, by their nature, very seasonal, with a winter operating period that ranges from 14 to 23 weeks, or approximately 100 to 150 days, depending on the region of the country. Severe weather events and climate change are impacting the operating days negatively, with later starts and earlier finish dates becoming ever more apparent. As part of that, though, we also have to recognize that the greater potential for violent weather changes has also increased the possibility of more than a handful of weather-related closures happening in the ski season. Ski areas are very interested in investing in climate mitigation strategies. Many will have heard of snowmaking or snow farming. Other opportunities exist for ski areas to winterize their businesses. But areas are also interested in expanding into summer operations and other seasons with sport offerings such as mountain biking, sight skiing, conferences, and many, many other unique tourism experiences. These summer operations are still confined to a relatively short period of 8 to 12 weeks at most ski areas. Less than 12 ski areas across the country have viable 4-season business models. The impact on the seasonal employee mirrors the circumstances of our businesses. Bear in mind, please, that 85% of our workforce is seasonal in nature. These employees cover all levels of employment, from lower skilled frontline jobs in hospitality and in our guest services applications to higher skilled persons such as grooming operators, lift mechanics, and snowmakers, just to mention a few. The short and potentially weather-affected winter season can make it difficult for seasonal employees to access EI benefits. For example, here in Collingwood, Ontario, where I'm located today, the required number of hours to gain access to benefits is 700 working hours. With a short operating season of around 100 to 105 days, there is a slim margin of approximately 80 hours that the employee has to work with to ensure access to benefits. A late start to the season or an early closure can mean all the difference for a winter season employee. Not to mention the closures that are brought on by increasingly volatile weather. It is not unusual here in Ontario to lose more than 5 operating days per year due to rain, wind, lightning, and, believe it or not, excess snowfall. Summer operations, as we all begin to move into that, can add to an employee's 52-week total of working hours. However, the season is very short, particularly in Western Canada, where the snowpack hampers the start of summer operations for mountain biking, sightseeing, etc. And while ski areas attempt to move key staff into summer roles, the overall size of the summer workforce currently is less than 60% of the winter workforce, which exacerbates the the need and the change that we go through. For employees of ski areas without summer business, the length of time between the finish of one winter season and the start of a next can be a significant challenge, especially in rural environments in Canada. We believe that extending the maximum weeks of employment insurance benefits would ease the social burden on small rural communities in which ski areas operate. Thank you for your time, and I'll look forward to future questions.
Thank you, Mr. Excuse me, Mr. Pinchbeck. Monsieur Thibodeau, vous pour 5 minutes.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be with you here today. My name is Fernand Thibodeau, and I represent the Seasonal Workers Help and Support Group. I'm here today to discuss the situation of seasonal industry workers who are at the heart of the economy in our regions and who live in regions dependent on seasonal industries. Seasonal industries have always played an important role in the Canadian economy, being of central importance in some regions of the country where they provide a major part of the available jobs. Unfortunately, where there exists a dependency on the seasonal industries in more and more regions, it's no longer possible to live in the combination of seasonal work and employment insurance support. Even if workers accept all available work in the high season, they're unable to make it through the dead season. In a good year, a seasonal industry worker will work 12 to 14 weeks, or the equivalent of 525 hours. Even in regions with more than 16% unemployment, they will only qualify for 33 weeks of support, leaving them with a gap of 5 weeks without income. Given the current rates in effect, the pilot project no longer meets the needs to fill this gap situation. The problems come from the fact that during the off-season, fewer jobs are available, and the lack of economic diversification makes us dependent on the support of the unemployment insurance program. So that's the problem of the black hole. Weeks without income lead to devitalization of our regions. People are always living on the edge. Young people are moving. It's a real depopulation of our area. The government's response with the pilot project added an additional 5 weeks, but this was appreciated, but it's not enough. I've just described, even in a region with maximum unemployment rates, this gap exists, this black hole. It's always existed, but for many of us, it's worsened in recent years. This is due to the fact that many of our communities are part of employment insurance regions where the unemployment rate is lower and does not reflect the actual situation of the ultra-local economy. For example, Restigouche, Albert, or small communities depend on the seasonal industry, but they're grouped with the suburbs of Moncton, which lowers the overall rate of benefit. Another problem is that in many of our communities, the unemployment rate is falling, but this is not because there are more jobs, but because the aging of the population, there are fewer job seekers for the same number of jobs available. This is why we believe that the pilot project must be improved. Since the government does not have the will to offer newer reforms, we have made representation to this effort, but the recommendations have not been accepted. Here are our recommendations. Increase to 15 weeks the number of additional weeks in the designated areas. These extra weeks should be subject to the existing maximum number of service, i.e. 45 weeks. Facilitate access to pilot projects by changing the eligibility criteria for seasonal work status. At this time, the rules are complicated, arbitrary, and ensure real workers in seasonal industries do not qualify. We propose that employers indicate on the record of employment whether it's a layoff season or not. Revise the map of employment insurance regions to better reflect labor market conditions. This map hasn't changed significantly for over 26 years. I've taken the opportunity to congratulate the work of the Employment Insurance Commission, work that seems to have been paralyzed by the COVID crisis. Another avenue is possible. Change the parameters of the employment insurance program with the following formula: 420 hours to qualify, 35 weeks of benefits, and then use the best 12 weeks to establish the base for benefit. This would be quite simple and straightforward. For those who are concerned about positive abuse of that, I would point out that first, the maximum, the current EI benefit, does not even meet the equivalent of the minimum wage, which itself is insufficient to pass the low income threshold. Secondly, according to control and evaluation of the report of the department responsible for EI, unemployed people on average only use 20 of the 35 weeks of benefits to which they're entitled. The vast majority, therefore, use the program in a reasonable manner. I point out that there are two key points here. Our regions need help to revitalize themselves. Employee insurance is not the solution to the problem, but it plays a vital role, and it needs to be adapted to meet our needs. Thank you.
Poindbeck, the chair is an avid alpine skier. I think I've skied on most of those hills across. So with that, we will begin the first line of questioning. Ms. Gray. Right, Ms. Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of the witnesses for being here today. My first questions are for Paul Pinchbeck from the Canadian Ski Council. Mr. Pinchbeck, a few years ago, the Canadian Ski Council reported that up to 30% of job vacancies at ski resorts across the country could remain empty by the time ski season hit. And around the same time, in my region of British Columbia, Big White Ski Resort, which I'll say has champagne powder, as they say, said that of the 600 to 700 staff traditionally hired, they had only confirmed 250 employees for the upcoming season. Now, as we look forward to the 2024-2025 season, are Canadian ski resorts still facing an issue of job vacancies?
MP Gray, first off, absolutely, the powder is champagne powder in Big White. I do live in the Okanagan half-time, and it's in the winter when I'm there. So the answer to your question is that we are feeling much more confident. And I don't want to sidetrack us, but we have been able to work with members of the team at the International Experiences Canada visa, often known as the Working Holiday visa, to really bring energy back into the program. And so individuals from Australia, New Zealand, from parts of Europe who are visiting our country and working at ski areas has climbed remarkably. We also have been working very hard at making sure that we are reaching out to our communities in order to have Canadians employed in key positions. And so we are feeling much better. We expect the shortfall to still be there, but we're now talking about between 5 and 10% of our workforce still unfound, if you will, by the time we open the season. So much better situation.
Great, thank you very much. Tourism HR Canada's Labour Force Survey in 2023 found that Canada's tourism sector still had not recovered to pre-pandemic levels, and the Canadian tourism labour force had actually declined by 4% as compared to pre-pandemic in 2029. So can you outline some of the challenges that tourism businesses like at ski resorts are returning to having, or what challenges they're having returning to pre-pandemic levels through Canadian employment and based on the business that you're seeing, if you could speak to that.
Certainly. The challenge with many ski areas across Canada is that we exist in largely rural communities, smaller population centers around us, much more pressure on housing and the opportunity to live and work within a community. And so while we are still growing back towards our visits, we're about 1 million skier visits internationally short of where we were pre-pandemic. The ski areas are also feeling the pinch of housing crisis and the lack of employee housing that tends to keep our citizens away.
Thank you very much. And we know with the cost of living crisis, I mean, there's many families that are barely affording basic necessities. You know, with housing doubling, we know that there's record number of people going to food banks, costs keep increasing, taxes keep increasing. And so having that disposable income to enjoy recreation and family activities is really more difficult. So are you seeing, because of the cost of living that crisis, that this is something that might deter people from being able to come and enjoy a day or more of skiing?
I think that the answer to that is yes. As cost of living has grown, Canada's ski areas are finding that public sentiment towards skiing is still strong, but definitely there will be a fixed number of ski days, as we call it, in everyone's wallet. What I'm finding now is that ski areas across the country that have enjoyed a post-pandemic boom in participation, people wanted to be outside in some very beautiful places. Are now turning to business solutions, products and services that meet a price point that allows individuals to access snow sports. My own organization does many of those, but each ski area will have targeted promotions to make sure that snow sports participation becomes or continues to be as affordable as it can be.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. We know that that with unemployment rates, that one of the largest groups of individuals that are unemployed are our youth. And so I'm wondering if you can just speak to that, you know, who many of your employees are, and what are the challenges in attracting youth to perhaps work at different ski resorts?
Interesting. Our workforce is very young. Of course, we also have a good segment of our workforce that are individuals who are active retirees, and we court them as well. But the young individual, it really comes down to the strong seasonality of our business. Here in Collingwood, and I suspect Big White would echo this thought, we are close to major centers that have a large number of competing employers. One can work at any business in Collingwood. We have all the big box stores and things like that for the same number of hours as a ski area. The challenge that we have is the ongoing seasonality of our business, where a young person will have X number of hours one week and then perhaps fewer hours the next, whereas at, let's say, the local Canadian Tire, they have a much more fixed schedule. And so oftentimes they become the employers of choice. We continue to work on that. Blue Mountain in my backyard here in Collingwood has started to offer year-round benefits protection to individuals who work on a seasonal basis. They now call them core seasonal.
Thank you, Ms. Gray. Mr. Kuzmicek for 6 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. It's really good to be back here to HUMA committee, which has a reputation on the Hill of being a very workmanlike, very consequential, and well-run committee. So this really delighted to be back here at HUMA. Sure.
By the way.
Yes. Can we get a vote on that? Yes, I'd like to put forward a motion. Madame Sirois, there are 350,000 seasonal workers across Canada. We see concentrations in Quebec and in the Atlantic provinces, but they're everywhere, and they are absolutely vital. And I wanted to pick up on something that you had said, and something that we heard from the extensive roundtable discussions and consultations that we had in 2021 and 2022, and what we heard, which is that jobs may be seasonal, but workers are not. And I wanted you to maybe speak a little bit about the vital work that seasonal workers do. Also, maybe speak about the variations that we see, the differences that we see perhaps in regions in Canada and industries. And furthermore, just perhaps maybe shed some light on how you think that EI should be tailored to reflect some of those variations that we see, both regional and in terms of sector specific.
Oui, merci beaucoup pour...
Well, thank you very much for your question. Seasonal industries, I can talk only about my lived experience, but I was such a worker in a forestry nursery. The reality that we have here on the front lines is that a lot of women seasonal workers live in high anxiety because of the variability of EI or insurance benefit rates. Certain individuals have to double up their seasonal jobs if they can. And even if they're working on 2 jobs at a time simultaneously, they still don't have enough hours to benefit from the top of the EI range. We have to work many hours to get our 14 weeks of benefits. On the North Shore, almost all employment is seasonal. Tadoussac, for example, not a very large group. They hire a lot of people during the summer, but come the cold seasons, these people cannot find another job available in that region. In the summertime, the unemployment rate, at 1,800 perhaps, and it goes to almost 6,000 during the wintertime. So you see the contrast between summer employment and winter employment. And this is true for the entirety of the region of North Shore. The difficulty, of course, that the small populated areas are very isolated from each other. They're very remote from one to the other. So we would have liked to see that we eliminate once and for all these administrative regions which don't reflect reality of the situation in the too broad region. Now, as was said earlier, we should have a basic of 90 hours, 75% of which would be based on your 12 best weeks. I don't know if you can imagine with the cost of living that we have to deal with today that people only get 55% of the base salary and often less, because we're working on 22 best weeks, and that gives you a lower average. So you're losing quite a bit, and the benefit rate is a lot less on the North Shore. Peatlands, of course, and nursery and forestry, for example, and tourism, fisheries, these individuals are not really considered. These are not summer jobs for students. These are real, true employment. And they're not treated as such. We have to protect these workers, particularly in the winter, because they have to leave the region. They can't survive with what they get only from seasonal work wages, and even with the benefits. We've had a loss of population. It's the highest, I think, in all the regions of Quebec, even if you look at both wages and benefits. And I believe that that's probably true in most regions of Canada. But if we impoverish these seasonal workers, we are in fact jeopardizing many of the sectors of employment in our region, which can't possibly employ employees 100% of the time, year long, but that just doesn't exist. We don't fish much during the winter. Peat cannot be harvested in the winter, and of course we have pretty severe winters as well. We need the employment insurance system. We have to survive. But it has to reflect the realities in our region. We would like to see a removal of all these regions, make it universal.
Kuzmerchuk, Madame Chabot, vous la parole pour...
Madame Chabot, you have the floor for 6 minutes. Madame Chabot, oui, à vous. Thank you, Chair. And I want to thank Mr. Serrois, Mr. Thibodeau, and the director for the Ski Association. I think the issue is a major one, and there's a vast difference between the reality on the ground for seasonal workers in our regions, even in our cities, if you wish, or villages throughout Canada. The study is very important because, according to Madame Serrois, for example, congratulations, first of all, for all those years as a seasonal employee and for your advocacy work for Action Chômage the North Shore. You hadn't quite finished your testimony. You were unable to fulfill that, but what would allow us to ensure that seasonal employed people would meet a living wage? Thank you very much, Madame Chabot, for your question. I also congratulate you for the work that you're doing in Parliament to defend the rights and privileges of our workers. Our suggestions are easy. We'd like to have a universal standard of 420 hours of work for seasonal employees because the variable rates from region to region or sector to sector is far too significant. We want to reduce the universal standard to 420 of work or the 12 best weeks of 15 hours. Benefit rate should be 70% of the 12 weeks, 15 hours of additional protection for unemployed workers in seasonal jobs as long as a 35-week minimum is not established. It's the only plan that's going to allow us to get out of this black hole, this gap, and to allow a more equitable access to unemployment insurance. Thank you, Madame Serrois. Mr. Thibodeau, I would also like to congratulate you. Although you say that you're working as a volunteer, that's an economic reality for your region. It would represent, I don't know what percent of the economy, but you also mentioned of this black hole, this gap between the benefits and the needs. In 2018, correct me if I'm wrong, 5 weeks in a pilot project for certain regions, certain zones for seasonal workers. And the government committed to improve these pilot projects. But since 2018, the only thing the government has done is just maintain the status quo at 5 weeks. Could you explain why, Mr. Thibodeau, that this no longer responds to the current needs of seasonal workers? Thank you much, Madame Chabot. It's a pleasure to be here to represent, as you say, even voluntary work, which is a lot of work nonetheless. I accompany a lot of people here in New Brunswick, on the Acadian Peninsula in particular, but in also all regional regions of New Brunswick. It's all seasonal industry. It's all seasonal employment. We can't harvest strawberries, raspberries, blueberries during the winter. We can't work in a dairy operation as civically. So the pilot project as such, in 2018, when it was first proposed and installed, we in Caracat, we were a lot of people there who were very frustrated, and there were protests, but this is what gave this pilot project in 2018. And 5 weeks, all right, then perhaps it was some significant. But now we have Restigouche-Albert, which is in fact treated as a subsector of Moncton, and particularly in the Acadian Peninsula, we cannot be considered just another element. It doesn't meet the needs that people have. We need a lot more weeks than 5. There's over 5 million seasonal workers that have, in fact, worked very hard to try to get better benefits. I'm glad to see you there in the Parliament speaking on our behalf, and I hope certainly that there'll be a reform of EI soon, because it's never been done. The federal government has all the necessary tools to do the job, but there's no political will to do so. The minister said when we proposed our recommendations, he didn't want to allow the Conservatives to eat their lunch. Now, we need more weeks. As you said to my colleague, Madame Serrois, we need 15 supplementary weeks in that pilot project, and we need to have the acknowledgement that we will get further protections. 420 hours. 420 hours should be the base, and 35 insurable weeks for benefit purposes. We have tourism as a Mr. Thibodeau. Thank you. I'm sorry your time is up, Madam.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. And actually, I'm gonna ask Witness Thibodeau to continue on. I see that Witness Thibodeau was here 4 years ago. It looks like almost 4 years ago with similar information for this committee. So, I wanted to ask if you could also expand on the connection between seasonal work and climate change. We know that the EI needs modernization, that needs reform. How do we also incorporate the fact that seasonal workers, that the timing of that season might be changing or has changed?
C'est sûr que, vous le disiez, permet aussi l'environnement et tout ça, fait du changement au niveau, que ce soit au niveau des pêcheurs. Je pense que c'est ça que c'est, parce que moi, je suis francophone. Là. Je dois vous dire que c'est sûr, ça peut jouer un rôle.
Monsieur,
OK, ça peut...
Monsieur
oui?
Thibodeau?
Mr. Thibodeau, just a moment. The interpreter was not online. Now he is. So take it.
C'est sûr que l'environnement...
Yes, the climate has played a major role here in New Brunswick as to the calculation of our seasons. The unpredictability of a start date, finish date, or interruptions, it'll always be there. The climate has never been stable or predictable. Now, I was talking about the seasonal groups and tourism. We are quite a bit, we have a popular area in tourism, and people have been working in that, but they were missing 16 hours only in order to be admissible to the benefits. They work hard, they do 2 or 3 jobs so that they can get hours and sort of bank them. But tourism will always be there. Soft berry crops will always be there. Fisheries as well. I don't think we're going to see the oceans dry up, and we'll always have fisheries, but that's seasonal. And all these workers who work in their various trades or employment sectors, we want to see their hours respected, no matter what kind of jobs they have.
Pinch, just on that idea of climate change and how the seasons might have changed, and if the government is going to open up EI and modernize, what do they need to think about in the changing seasons or the timing of that?
Sorry for that. I was on mute, but it's an excellent question. I think that what we have seen and will continue to see in Canada's winter sports industry is twofold. There will be a continual decline of what we call our total number of ski days. So I mentioned in my presentation 100 to 150. That will go down over the next number of years. We will also see more weather-interrupted events. I think the answer to this question really is very similar to what my fellow presenters are advocating for, in that we need to look at in our case, rural ski areas as a different subset of what their regions might be. Again, when we go out to Invermere, British Columbia, where Panorama Mountain Resort is located, that's very similar to Blue Mountain in that it's 700 hours to qualify for EI benefits and a relatively short week. When Panorama loses a few days or a few weeks of season because of weather events, and they're a heavy snowmaking ski area, they have invested significantly in protecting their business, but it still happens. Those employees are left.
And sorry, just to cut you off because I don't have much time. I don't think that there's anywhere in BC that qualifies for the government exemptions of additional weeks of employment insurance. Is there? Are you aware of any?
I am not aware of any.
Thank you. Oh, I still have 2 minutes. Okay, so I'm going to ask witness Siwa. I'm sure you're as frustrated as potentially some of the other witnesses here on this call. I'm sure you've been talking about this for probably more than a decade. I wonder if you could share your thoughts on how the seasons have changed, how seasonal work has changed, and how climate change is and might be affecting your workers that you represent.
Oui, merci beaucoup de me permettre de répondre. Chez nous, c'est important.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to reply. Climate change has resulted in our area of a lot of wildfires. And this would cut off access to their jobs, particularly if they're forestry workers and, in fact, sometimes agricultural. There's prohibitions put on about entering a certain area, of course, for safety reason, and they will lose many, many hours, and they don't end up being admissible to the benefits. They don't qualify. We've been preaching the same thing for 2 years. Wildfires are a very high risk for us and an impediment. But we can keep talking, but, there's also reforestation that is affected. Also, just strictly wood harvesting, lumberjacks. We have women working in that area, and they are facing a larger and wider gap of income during the winter because of these wildfires.
On that, we recently had witnesses here talking about affordable housing and mass timber, and I'm just wondering if you think there is an opportunity to revitalize the industry around wood and resource extraction, I guess, on wood in Canada.
A short answer. Madame Sirois.
Oui, la question est pour moi. Oui, on espère.
Okay, the question's for me. We certainly hope that one day we'll be able to re-establish lumber industry on our North Shore. Mills, harvesting and mills. 10 years ago, there were a number of these mini mills, if you will, all over the region, and we'd like to re-establish that lumber industry. Thank you very much, Madam.
Thibodeau, you have your hand up. Did you want?
Oui, je voulais juste mentionner aussi que nous.
Well, I'd simply like to add that in our area.
You can do that if your question again. Mr. Aitchison for 5 minutes.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses here. It's interesting, as I look through there's a breakdown of industries where seasonal work is very common, and I come from an area called Parry Sound Muskoka, which is I think probably reasonably well known as an area of a lot of recreation, a lot of seasonal type work, a lot of people in the building. There's a lot of forestry, construction, accommodation, and food service. It's all very common in my area. And in my previous life before getting here, I talked to a lot of folks in the resort industry and the challenges that they faced, and this is clearly a big part of it. I'm wondering if I could start, I guess, with everybody, but I'll start with Paul and Collingwood, since you probably know the area pretty well too. The housing crisis has also been an issue in these industries in my community, and I'm assuming it is in yours as well. Could you I mean, affordability, generally speaking, is part of the issue here, but the challenge of housing is exacerbating the situation that we're here to talk about today. Would you say that's a fair statement, and could you comment on that?
It is absolutely a fair statement. The cost of housing, although Canada Ski Areas continue to invest in employee housing, that does not meet the needs for individuals who wish to come in and build lives within these communities. And so I think you're very perceptive to understand that this impacts our ability to continue to have great employees. The suggestions that we would have around, that are very similar to my colleagues, around lowering the minimum hours for qualification and extending the number of weeks would ease the opportunity for people to enter communities, work in seasonal positions. It might be the spouse of someone who has a full-time job, but it really makes the whole living in a community, raising children, attaining what we might call the Canadian dream much easier.
Okay, thanks for that. Madame Sirois, est-ce que la crise du logement est une situation?
Is the housing crisis a problem in your area as well, Madame Sirois? Madame Sirois. Yes, absolutely, absolutely. What we are living with is that we have a lot of fly-in, fly-out employees seasonally. And a lot of employers have built lodgings for those who come in from away. And it makes it much more difficult because they don't really have access to adequate housing, if you will. It's very seasonal housing. And a lot of workers come and live there in the summer in long time, for as long as they can, but they have to return to their home base. And they can only get 50%, 55% of the normal salary that they are paid. It's impossible to live on it in the wintertime because the cost of living away from the summer lodgings is much higher. So housing in the region, in the area, even if we, we have 400 miles of coastline, and we still have a big lack in social housing, in adequate housing. What we see is seasonal housing, and this is not. This is okay for the summer when they're there, but during the summer they're abandoned and they have to leave the area. So this is very, very challenging for the industry in our area.
Monsieur Thibodeau, la même question pour.
Mr. Thibodeau, same question to you. In New Brunswick, the housing industry is. We have a lot of outsiders that come into work in seasonally, of course, along with our local population. But the rate or the cost of lodging is extremely high. People can't really pay the rent, even the seasonal rent. And with EI going at 55%, they have a lot of difficulty in paying the rent. The new government in place today in New Brunswick is committed to creating new housing for these individuals, for this sector, adjusted to ability to pay, means tested, if you will. So they'll have an adequate living space. We also have people coming in, even temporary foreign workers in some cases. And they face a situation where they really can't afford the price. Okay, Mr. Thibodeau, thank you very much.
Merci, Mr. Aitchison. Mr. Van Bynen for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is an interesting research that we're doing, and I'm finding that some of the information that we've received from the Library of Parliament, would that routinely be part of the reports that come out, or do we have to introduce the information relative to the provinces, et cetera, that have different levels of unemployment? How do we introduce that into evidence, or does that routinely become part of the evidence?
Drafting instructions, you could request that the information provided to the committee on this particular issue from the Library of Parliament.
Okay, thank you.
Be, especially if you reference it in your comments.
Good. Thank you. Because I think that's very informative information. And if we're going to review the unemployment insurance process, then I think that information would be very helpful in developing new strategies if necessary. I'm hearing that regulations and the criteria in the existing regime are harsh, and that prompts some additional reviews. I'm also hearing that we're focusing on seasonal workers as opposed to seasonal industries, and so that might be a perspective that we need to give some consideration to if there is going to be any further studies going forward. But I'll ask my questions to each of the panels, and if you could just be brief. To what extent does the black hole disproportionately impact specific groups of seasonal workers? I'll start with Ms. Sorois.
Oui, ben effectivement, le
Well, yes, in fact, this gap or black hole has had a major effect for women employees, particularly in the seasonal industries. They can't leave their home, their residence, to go and work outside because of their family responsibilities, their children, their elders. And we are really impoverishing our women in these areas, in this sector.
Thank you. I'd like to echo Madame Serrois' comments. In our ski areas, we find that women employees are often in the most seasonal of jobs, again, because of the family responsibilities that they both endure and enjoy at times. I'd also like to point out that because Canada's ski areas exist in a largely rural environment, it's one of the key factors in attracting some of our newest citizens to rural communities is the availability of jobs. We are a very interested, we're very, very popular opportunity for jobs, but we are also looked upon as highly seasonal and therefore not stable at all. Thank you.
Mr. Thibault?
Oui, je dois répondre que nous aussi.
Yes, in New Brunswick, we also, the way it's working for this black hole or gap, we have a lot of women working in plants, fish plants and other seasonal jobs, but also men who are working in the peat bogs or fishing. And with the EI that is available to us and being blended in with the municipalities or larger cities, it's very, very difficult to get to the level of coverage that we need in our benefits. And it's particular to this group because women in particular, like as was said, they have other family responsibilities and they just can't get away. But it also applies to a lot of men who are in shortening seasons.
It's interesting that no one mentioned any specific age groups. And I'm wondering, are there any specific age groups, if you could say yes and identify the specific age groups? And I'll go back to Ms. Sirah.
Oui, tout à fait. Là, ce qu'on voit là, maintenant, c'est...
Well, what we see today is that younger employees do not have the same access as offered by the federal government under the certain criteria. When we talk about the 5 supplementary weeks, you must have worked previously 3 years in a certain sector, make 3 applications for jobs in that sector. And as the aging population, it's a lot more difficult for them to qualify for EI. The work is physically hard and difficult, and men will...
As well, could briefly.
Out of time. Monsieur Thibodeau?
Oui, par chez moi, c'est sûr qu'on a beaucoup de...
Well, yes, in our area who are either retired or approaching retirement. And we also have a high level of illiteracy and no formal schooling. it's hard to specialize in one field. A lot will be doing what you might call gig jobs, but seasonal.
We'll have to end with that as we've now concluded our first hour. So again, I want to thank the witnesses for appearing this morning and providing testimony to the panel. You are free to go. We'll suspend for a few moments while we transition to the panelists for the last hour. We'll suspend for no more than 3 minutes. Suspend. Committee members, if you could take your seats, we will resume the second hour of witness testimony on this study by welcoming committee members, your attention, by welcoming two witnesses who are appearing in person in the room. We have Miss Jana Craden, Agricultural Workforce Expert, Canadian Mushroom Growers Association, and Ms. Angela McEwen, Senior Economist, National Services, Canadian Union of Public Employees. You have 5 minutes for your opening statement, and I will advise you when your 5 minutes is up. We'll begin with Ms. Craden. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on behalf of the great Canadian mushroom industry. So the agriculture sector creates about 570,000 jobs in Canada. 1 in 34 jobs is generating 150 billion, 70% of Canada's GDP. So that's not small potatoes. About half of the workforce is employed in permanent occupations and half are employed in seasonal due to Canada's winters and growing season. Agriculture is facing a chronic and increasing labour shortage. The most recent statistics from Canadian Ag HR Council identifies over 28,000 jobs that went unfilled in Canada's agriculture sector, costing the sector $3.5 billion in lost revenues. Canada is a strong and adaptable high-tech mushroom sector within the ag sector that contributes over $1 billion to the Canadian economy. Mushrooms double in size every day. Canada grows over 150,000 tons of mushrooms annually. If you buy a fresh mushroom in a Canadian grocery store, it comes from one of our local Canadian mushroom farms. All of our workers are essential and we are proud of them. Mushroom farms are a big job creator in Canada, offering competitive wages, employing 70% of Canadians on our farms. We are constantly recruiting for local workers, and we use the temporary foreign worker program as a last resort for our high-demand entry-level positions, such as the harvesting laborer occupation. Mushrooms are the largest sector employer of the temporary foreign worker program agricultural stream, employing over 2,400 workers when Canadians do not apply. Mushroom farms pay good wages for a variety of jobs, from harvesting, human resources, to growers. Our harvesting laborers make above minimum wage as they are paid piece rate, where some workers can make up to $29 an hour. So the Canadian Mushroom Growers Association members, we work together on a mushroom fair labor and ethical recruitment program, which supports employer best practices. And one of the things that our farms do is our HR teams help to make sure the workers are signed up for the correct programs, such as employment insurance. So our agricultural stream workers are eligible to use employment insurance the same as all Canadians. They use it when they are sick or injured. For example, during COVID, they originally used the EI, and then when the CERB came into effect, when they were off and isolated, then they used the CERB following all public health regulations. For cases of short-term disability, some farms have short-term disability insurance plus EI coverage. So another situation, our agricultural stream workers under the temporary foreign worker program use EI, is for the maternity leave when our female agricultural stream workers get pregnant. They qualify for the standard 600 hours within a year, just like Canadians in the domestic workforce, and where they receive 55% of their income. Under the EI rules, they get 1 year maternity for up to a year and a half. At the end of maternity standard leave allocated, the workers then return to work. So this is where we are having problems with the temporary foreign worker program. It's actually with our housing issues. So we need housing options for our workers beyond the employer-paid housing, which is communal, where workers are paying $30 per week for housing, even though they're making above the prevailing wage or higher. It's very stringent rules we find within the program for the farm employers and for the workers, and this is the only option they're right now allowing, and we're not finding there's a lot of options being developed within the agriculture and seafood program that we're working on. So for our workers who are pregnant, who have children, the babies cry, and other workers understandably complain. So we need flexibility for our workers with families, and we've been discussing this with the Temporary Foreign Worker Program Directorate, but we were being ignored. So the majority of the mushroom farms offer excellent quality apartment-style housing with only 1 to 2 workers per bedroom, and so I think this has been distributed to everyone. We have a video which will also be available within the submission. And we basically, our Immigration Canada is encouraging families to come to Canada. If they apply to the Agri-Food Immigration Pilot, then their families can come to Canada with open work permits. And we strongly support the Agri-Food Immigration Pilot, and we strongly support also the open work permits for spouses, but we need other options for housing, and this is what we continue to explain.
Creighton, your 5 minutes has gone over.
Okay, I'll just finish up here. So basically, we're asking for you, our farmers are forced to keep housing empty, this kind of quality housing, when the workers choose to live on their own. and it's costing $1 billion a year. So we've made very good recommendations that with proper worker protections, which we continue to advocate for, which I'm willing to answer
Time
questions
has gone
about.
well over now. You
Thank
can
you.
address any other point in your question. Ms. McEwen? Ms. McEwen for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm here on behalf of the Canadian Union of Public Employees. It's Canada's largest union with over 700,000 members. We deliver quality services in communities across Canada in a broad cross-section of the economy: healthcare, education, municipalities, libraries, universities, colleges, childcare, public utilities, airlines. So this is something that we're following. Some regions of Canada have a disproportionate number of jobs that are seasonal in nature. And I just want to point out sometimes how we talk about it. It is actually a reflection of the economic reality of those regions and not of the workers. It's not seasonal workers, it's seasonal industries. And employment insurance being available to workers in these seasonal industries actually provides a macroeconomic stabilizing effect for the regions, buffering the ups and downs of those industries. One factor here is that the duration of EI benefits actually depends on the number of hours that a worker has worked, but also the unemployment rate in their EI region. And so over time, over the past few years, the unemployment rate in Canada has trended down, and this has meant the appearance of what is called a black hole in some of these seasonal regions, where unemployment insurance is no longer enough to fill the gap in seasonal employment. EI has offered some pilot projects starting in 2018 that offer extra weeks, but that's a Band-Aid solution and is not working. Since the extra weeks pilot was introduced in 2018, the unemployment rate in the 12 targeted regions in Eastern Canada dropped by nearly 3%. So it's even harder now to qualify for employment insurance, and when you do, you get far fewer weeks of entitlement. Compared to the rest of Canada, the unemployment rate has only dropped 1%. So this is really hitting these seasonal regions. Every percentage point drop in the regional unemployment rate means 2 fewer weeks of EI benefits for an unemployed worker. So since 2018, we now need an extra 6 weeks to make up that gap. And a lower unemployment rate in these regions doesn't necessarily mean that it's easier to get a job. It just means there's fewer people there looking for a job. There's falling labor force participation rate, an aging population, lots of reasons why this is happening. There's also the increased number of temporary migrant workers. It's starting to get to the size where it's kind of distorting this signal of the unemployment rate, because before workers come to Canada to work, they're not counted as unemployed workers. They're not counted in that labor supply. Unemployment is meant to be an indication of the supply of available workers, but those workers aren't counted. And it could mean up to a percentage or 2 difference in the unemployment rate if we did count those workers. Another factor is the design of the EI economic regions. Some of the subregions most affected are actually lumped in with other areas where that has a completely different economic profile. For example, in the New Brunswick Peninsula, southern Nova Scotia, and parts of Quebec. And advocates in these regions have been asking for a review of EI boundaries for some time to address this fact. So we have some recommendations: increase the number of extra weeks in the pilot project from 5 to 15, introduce a new reason for separation in the record of employment called seasonal layoff, which streamlines the administration of these claims and makes the process fair to workers. And another thing we could do is allow workers to try jobs and not be penalized for doing so. Currently, if a worker takes a risk on a job that is uncertain and it doesn't work out, and they're quit or fired, or then they lose their access to EI benefits. They're now no longer eligible. So workers might decide not to take a risk on a job because they don't know whether or not that's going to mean losing benefits. And then finally, reviewing the EI boundaries to make sure that they're actually representative of the economic realities in the region. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Ms. McEwen. We'll begin with the first round with Mr. Aitchison for 6 minutes.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank our witnesses here this afternoon as well. I've mentioned earlier that we, in Parry-Sound-Muskoka, where I'm from, we have a large seasonal workforce, and like resort staff and that kind of thing, and cooks who prepare amazing meals in the summer, but worry about how they're going to feed their own families. So I definitely have questions for you, and I want to thank you again for being here. Our time is limited, though, and I also want to do something else. I want to give verbal notice If I could, Mr. Chair, I have a notice of motion of my colleagues around the table, so I'll read it now if that's okay. And it reads, given that in order to save Canadians up to $50,000, reduce mortgage payments by $2,200 every year in a typical home, and build 30,000 more homes every year, the committee report to the House its recommendation to remove the federal GST on new homes sold for under $1 million. So that's the motion. It's very simple. Nothing, I think, alarming in that. But we know that the housing crisis is getting worse. Rent and mortgages, price of the average home have all doubled in the last 9 years. And so, back in October 2015, it only took about 39% of median pre-tax household income to cover home ownership costs. Now it's over 60%. And so government charges, we've said this over and over, account for almost more than 30% of the cost of a home. And of course, the GST is the biggest share of that, HST. And this committee's heard overwhelmingly from those in the industry, including some of the witnesses we heard from earlier, that housing costs are a huge part of the affordability crisis in this country. And so Conservatives have proposed this solution. It's a bold solution to remove the GST on new homes under $1 million. And so I think it's time that we propose that to the committee, to the House. And so I just wanted to put that on verbal notice, if I might, Mr. Chair. Okay. Everyone's good with that then?
I'll notice it'll come back at a future date, Mr.
That's great.
Richardson.
Thank you. Okay. How much time do I have left now?
4 minutes.
4 minutes?
A little less, about 4 minutes, roughly.
Okay. Thank you very much. I thought Eric was going to cause problems there and slow me down, but he didn't. So that was, he was close, but he didn't. Okay. Thanks very much. I'll start with Ms. Creighton, if I might. In many rural and remote parts of Canada, agriculture represents the first job many young Canadians will ever do. We also know that youth unemployment in Canada continues to rise. Young Canadians struggle to find their first-time job, even in an agricultural region like the Okanagan, as an example. What are some of the cost challenges agricultural businesses are facing that might limit their ability to hire and train young Canadians?
Hi. So, we find that for Canadian domestic with the youth, we have a better chance of recruiting them, like for more internship programs and, what people would call more like the higher skilled. What we're finding is for the, what we would say the entry-level harvesting laborer positions, generally what's happening is they'll, and this has been through surveys, this is documented, that people will apply, including occasionally young people as well, and then a lot of times they leave after a day. That's very common. So we find there's a better connection for more of an internship program, which like a lot of farms, you've got a lot of grower positions, which includes a lot of science, HR positions, and you have interim and farm managerial positions. I think there's a better connection there, and if ESDC, worked with the industry on that, I think you'd have a lot better chances of recruiting and retaining youth.
You mentioned science positions, the growing. A lot of training obviously is involved in that,
Exactly.
and so can you speak to the cost of that training? What I mean, that must be a significant input cost to hiring young people.
Yeah, so we haven't actually tracked that, but we have. We know that we do a lot of on-the-job training on the farms. Like every farm is a little different, every sector is different, and it is tremendous time and cost, and basically none of that's being tracked or recognized a lot of times within the departments, because on-the-job training that goes on in the farm is really not recognized, for example, by the immigration department. So we're finding this very difficult because it's just basically an unrecognized area, and the time and the cost is not being tracked by the departments, unfortunately.
And can you speak to the impact of high inflation and interest over the last couple of years? What kind of impact has that had on your industry?
Yes, we find that costs across the board for all of what they call their inputs and the expenses to run a farm has went up maybe 30% or more. And things like fertilizer, for example, and also the carbon tax is not helping. So we've been hopeful that that private members bill on the carbon tax would go through and include the heating of the buildings, because we're not included for any exemptions, even though we heat the buildings for the mushroom farms, unfortunately. So they're getting charged an extraordinary amount of carbon tax. So it's just one more expense on top of all the other increasing inflation for the farmers that they're absorbing.
Thank you. You got me excited when you mentioned carbon tax. I was going to continue on, but I'm out of time.
Over here, Mr.
Maybe you'll get another chance.
But I see you're showing up in the second round. Mr. Kuzmarchuk for 6 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much to both of you for your excellent testimony this afternoon. Workers in Canada are paying less in EI premiums today than they were paying under the Conservative government. It's significant. The EI premium rate has gone down from 1.88 to about 1.64 this year, so significantly less. At the same time, the EI program has been strengthened over that time as well too. And so you look at, for example, extended sickness benefits from 15 weeks to 26 weeks. We talked about the seasonal program adding an additional 5 weeks to help out with the income gap for seasonal workers, adoptive parents having extended EI benefits. And so under this Liberal government, EI is better managed. It is stronger, and workers are paying less in terms of EI premiums. I wanted to ask you, Ms. McEwen, as EI is strengthened in a phased approach, what should be the next step? What should be the next issue that we address in terms of prioritizing how we can continue to strengthen EI?
I have a list. So I work with the...
Can you help us prioritize? What would you say is the
So we
next
have a
big
list
one?
of 10 things to prioritize. One of them would actually be returning premiums to the higher rate so that we can invest in the things that we need. The training for LMDAs, the labor market development agreements, was cut in the last budget. And this is a time where we're going through lots of transitions in the labor market. There's climate change, there's AI, there's like a whole bunch of transitions in the labor market. And so actually reinvesting in training. Canada invests less money than most of our OECD counterparts in training. And so moving back into that space, I think, is really important. Obviously, the changes for seasonal workers. We've also worked on recommending, so women who get pregnant before or after they've been laid off often don't have enough benefits to cover, so making some changes to allow that. Their ESDC did a whole bunch of consultations, and there was some really strong recommendations, improving the involvement of the EI Commission, having more worker voice, worker and business voice in what happens.
And Ms.
I think
McEwen,
is really
I do
important.
appreciate the priorities. They're excellent priorities and extremely helpful. What should be the next, the first priority, first order of business in terms of how we can strengthen EI? So from the list of 10, which one would you say is the next one we ought to focus on?
Yeah, increase premiums and invest in training.
Okay. I'm glad you mentioned training because no government has invested more in worker training than this government. There's $3 billion that we transfer every year to the provinces. We've doubled the union training and innovation program. We've rolled out a program, sectoral workforce development program as well, that is industry-led. Every year, we commit over $1 billion to support apprentices as well too. So we are making investments in training and skills. I wanted to ask you specifically for seasonal workers, what flexibility can we build into the EI program to allow seasonal workers to be able to get the training and the upskilling that they need to be able to perhaps take a more predictable job or get them through, or take a job that allows them to see themselves through that income gap and in between their seasonal work. So what flexibility in EI programs could we build?
That's a great question. So actually, just to the level of investment, if we adjust it for inflation, it should be double what it is now to be comparable with what it was 15 years ago. But being flexible so that workers can train while they're still employed, maybe do some part-time stuff. And then I was on EI in 1997, and I did training through the EI program, and I continued to get EI benefits while I was doing my course. And so having something like that. And then apprenticeships not all sectors have apprenticeships. So childcare, healthcare, a lot of those entry-level jobs aren't officially apprenticeships. So building trades workers can get EI while they're doing their training, but childcare workers and healthcare workers who are in those entry-level jobs can't get EI while they're doing their training. And so looking at making that work, because we have shortages in those industries now.
And Ms. McEwen, thank you very much. I could literally talk to you all day on this subject matter. How much time do I have? A minute. Oh, this is fantastic. Oh, great. Bonus. I didn't realize that. I wanted to talk to you. So in terms of flexibility of the EI program, specifically as it relates to seasonal workers, working while on claim is an important and oftentimes underutilized part of the EI system. It allows workers to be able to find an additional job, earn some additional income while they still receive their EI benefits. Can you talk a little bit, Ms. McEwen, about the working while on claim and how we can, again, build flexibility into the EI program through working while on claim?
Yeah, I love the working while on claim program. I actually did that while I was on EI as well. And I think back then in 97, it was $100 a week that I could earn. And I think it's still close to that. So increasing the amount that you can earn, having some flexibility around being able to keep that money instead of clawing the first dollar back. There were some changes that were made around that. Will be helpful because the goal here is if you work while you're on claim, you're more likely to get a good labor market match. You're more likely to go back faster. And so if we're not clawing that money back and letting people keep it in their pockets, they're going to be more successful.
Thank you, Mr. Kuzmarchuk. Madame Chabot pour 6 minutes.
Madame Chabot, 6 minutes. Thank you, Chair. And thank you to our two witnesses for their testimony. Our study will hope to demonstrate that the reality of workers in seasonal industries in various regions, not only in Quebec, but in the Atlantic provinces as well, and elsewhere in Canada, will have an impact. Because employment becomes seasonal, so their working period, when they're unemployed, when they're not on the job, they don't have either salary nor benefits. Most groups, and I'm sure that CUPE was doing the same, is to try to eliminate the black hole in the insurance employment system. The notion, of course, is not to vitalize the region. It's not to train workers in their sector or who are looking to change sectors. But it's the quality of their life will contribute to the economy of the region. As you said before, it should be a stabilizing feature of their lifestyle, their cost of living, etc. It's one thing to have competent individuals who come back year after year, and we want to make sure that continues. For people who quit seasonal jobs to go and find something else somewhere else is a loss. Now, if there were measures taken within the system, the EI system, to correct, rectify, or minimize this black hole, what could those measures be, in your opinion?
So you're right. Being able to have EI for those workers means that those trained workers stay in the region and come back to that employer year after year. And as she mentioned, there's a lot of on-the-job training that you can't get elsewhere. So those employers have already invested that time in that worker and don't want to have to lose them next year. So if you have the longer benefit period, if you have the appropriate EI region that reflects the economic reality, and if you allow workers to try another job and not be penalized for that. There are also, this year, we had an unusual crisis in fishing where there just weren't as many hours. So a lot of workers didn't even get the hours that they needed. And so recognizing that when there are unusual economic circumstances, coming in with something that helps those workers who now aren't qualifying. Because the alternative is that they leave the region and the region loses those skilled workers, because we don't necessarily want to train them out of that job. Those jobs, as you heard, provide a huge amount of GDP to the economy. We rely on those jobs being there.
Et l'économie de nos régions s'en porte mieux.
And of course, the support for the various regions as well. You did explain on various topics. Your presentation was very, very interesting. In fact, I think we could get more information for you, because the definitions, for example, the criteria, eligibility criteria, etc., do no longer respond to the realities. Some commissioners been working on that for 2 or 3 years, but it's still an unfinished project. So how could we, in the short term, try to improve the system for economic gain for the entirety of the economy in Canada?
Yes, so there were a number of trial measures that we used during the pandemic, and there's been research done. The department has done research on the impact of those measures. So a lower pan-Canadian, like one entrance requirement of what we have recommended is 360 hours, but they did 420. So that lower entrance requirement helps precarious workers, and workers in seasonal industries are those precarious workers. Having that lower entrance requirement that doesn't vary based on the unemployment rate, because as we know, that's less and less reflective of what matters. Adjusting the unemployment rate and the number of weeks, so recognizing that the unemployment rate has changed, and so adjusting that. And then I think looking at having a floor of some kind. We know that all of those temporary benefits, there's other administrative things that make it simpler and faster to process EI. That, I think, those are good as well. But they're a little like niche. But there were a whole bunch of measures that we used during COVID that had a big benefit and didn't cost a huge amount of money. So.
Une minute. Madame.
Ms. Graydon, you spoke of 2,400 jobs. I know some might be temporary workers, TFW. How many are we talking about really for your sector? Mushrooms, for example. What does it mean to your sector?
So a lot of the farms explain without the temporary foreign worker program, they wouldn't be able to survive. Like, we need them to fill the job vacancies. So yeah, we have 2,400 temporary foreign worker program agricultural stream workers with the temporary foreign worker program. So 70% are Canadian. So we have, we're a small sector. We have a lot of employees. And we don't have loads and loads of farms, but we have, about 9,000 to 10,000 workers overall across Canada. And we fill the job vacancies with the proven labor market impact assessments.
C'est combien de semaines de travail le
How many weeks of work would that represent in a let's say a year's worth of work? Is it how many?
They work on the LMIA actually more full-time. So it'd be, they take a 2-week vacation within Mushroom. For the SOP work program, it's different, the seasonal program.
Merci, Madame Chabot. Madame Zarillo, for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I really appreciate the witnesses here today. And I note that there have been a number of references to disadvantages and discrimination for women in EI and at work. So I know that my witnesses will understand the importance of the motion I'm about to move. So on February 5th, 2024, the CEO of Air Canada, Michael Russo, told this committee, "I don't think it's appropriate for me to comment on that when I questioned him on what he thinks of all the unpaid work that flight attendants do." Then, in October, in response to my question on flight attendants' unpaid work to Minister McKinnon, he said, "Flight attendants have a collective agreement that sets out their hours and their wages, and it's not my place to comment on it." The Minister and the CEO of Air Canada sounded strangely similar in their answers, and that makes sense, as Air Canada has lobbied this government 189 times in the past 3 years. I'm sure the Liberal Minister is well aware that Canada's biggest airlines are all benefiting from the practice of not paying flight attendants when they are at work. It is time he stand up for them and to close the loophole in the Labour Code that allows this exploitation. Everyone on this committee can agree that unpaid work is unacceptable. Every hour worked should be an hour paid in full. As a committee, we can stand in solidarity against unpaid work and stand up for marginalized workers like flight attendants who are disproportionately women. When people in powerful positions punch down on marginalized workers, it is us as legislators who can stop it. As Canada's flight attendants get ready to go into a very busy seasonal travel season, after decades of exploitation, they should not have to work without protection. As I said, the government needs to close loopholes in the Labour Code. And we cannot go back to the Conservative era when the then Transport Minister, Lisa Wright, threatened to legislate flight attendants back to work. Flight attendants have never had a fair deal because they were women. The workforce has modernized since then, but still disproportionately women, and this government is leaving them with no protection against ongoing exploitation. Now, I know that the Conservatives are trying to continue to exploit flight attendants again for political purposes by fast-tracking a bill that favors airlines over their workers and allowing for this exploitation to continue. Again, as I say, we can't go back to the antiquated thinking around unpaid work. It's time to modernize. As such, Mr. Chair, I will be moving the motion I put on notice earlier this week, which reads that given that flight attendants in Canada, the majority of whom are women, work for an average of 35 hours for free every month because airlines don't pay flight attendants for duties like assisting passengers with boarding, pre-flight safety checks, deplaning, and other delays, resulting in flight attendants spending nearly a full work week every month working for free, even though they are in uniform and taking responsibility for the safety and well-being of their passengers. Canada's biggest airlines make millions of dollars each year on the backs of unpaid labour. Air Canada made $2.3 billion in profits last year, and the CAO's compensation was $12.4 million. Every hour worked should be an hour paid, and if a flight attendant is at work in uniform performing work duties, they should be getting paid. In the opinion of the committee, the government support flight attendants by amending the Canadian Labour Code to ensure that all time spent carrying out pre-flight and post-flight duties, completing mandatory training, and otherwise spent at the workplace at the disposal of the employer, including during a flight delay, regardless of if the delay was in the employer's control, is paid at a rate no less than the employee's regular rate of wages for their work, and the committee report this to the House. And I think, Mr. Chair, in the light of climate change, we had discussions about it earlier. This is even more pressing for flight attendants in this country. Thank you.
Thank you, Madame Zarillo. Madame Zarillo has moved a motion, which was her prerogative to do. It was in order. Discussion, Ms. Falk.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. We would like to propose an amendment to this motion. given that this main parts of this motion are identical to a Conservative member of Parliament's private member's bill that has been tabled in this House. So I would make the assumption that Ms. Cirillo would support this amendment. In the opinion of the committee, the government must pass Bill C-409 to support flight attendants. So this is just a simple amendment, basically in line with what she's saying, and supporting the private member's bill to make sure that there is equity for flight attendants.
Thank you. We now have an amendment on the floor. So discussion on the amendment. Madame Chabot and Mr. Fragas-Kettos on the amendment. And Mr. Coteau.
Yeah, Chair,
Mr. Sorry, Madame Chabot.
Deux choses.
2 points. I would hope that we can adjourn or suspend the debate on this motion so that we can continue with our witnesses today.
A motion to suspend debate, Madame Chabot? So I have a motion to adjourn discussion on the amended motion, recorded vote on the So the motion is. Yes, it's to adjourn. We're voting on adjourning discussion on the amendment to the motion. Record a vote. It's been called. So record a vote, Madam Clerk. And we're voting on adjourning discussion on the amendment of Ms. Falk. Then we'll have to return to the main motion.
No, we don't need to return to the main.
So yes, so you're correct. It's the vote is to adjourn discussion on the amendment, which adjourns discussion on the motion. Record a vote.
Mr. Fragas-Kettos? Yes. Mr. Kurzmischuk?
Yes.
Mr. Collins? Yes. Mr. Coteau?
Yes.
Mr. Van Bynen?
Yes.
Mrs. Falk? No. Mr. Lawrence?
No.
Mr. Wu?
No.
Mr. Aitchison?
No.
Madame Chabot?
Oui.
Ms. Cirillo? Yeas pour 6-6, nays contre 5-5. So the discussion is adjourned.
The discussion is adjourned. We'll return to the witnesses with.
Order, Mr. Chair. Point of order, Mr. Chair. That was an adjournment on their amendment. Can I get some clarification of the standing order that says that the whole debate is adjourned?
Clerk, respond to Madame Cirillo.
So Ms. Chabot, she moved a dilatory motion to adjourn debate on the discussion on the motion. Where the discussion was at is the amendment that was moved by Ms. Falk. And so the dilatory motion would still adjourn debate on the discussion of the motion as a whole.
Number?
We'll provide that to you. In the meantime, we're returning to the witness. Mr. Aitchison is who I have as the next. Yes. As the next questioner.
How
for
much
5
time?
minutes.
Okay, beautiful. That's exciting. Thank you. We were just getting warmed up, you and me, Ms. Craden, and I'm excited to get going back on this again. Because we were talking about the heinous impact of the carbon tax on your industry. If we can get back into that, I'm wondering if you can help the committee just have an understanding of the magnitude of the cost of the carbon tax on the cost of operating in your industry.
Yes, so mushroom farms, the same as greenhouse, the same as chicken barns, all livestock barns. Like we have to heat the barns in the winter because of Canada's cold weather. So all of the gas that we pay to heat the barns, we get no exemptions, and the carbon tax is increasing at its regular times, and it's very, very expensive. So we have submitted, like our farmers have submitted like invoices, like showing how much the carbon tax is. So I am going to be sending a submission based on my comments and other additional information we didn't get to on the issues we're having with work permits and the housing, but I can also include the costs because we have figured this out, and it's astronomical, and it's getting a bit larger and larger, and so it's adding to the inflationary costs. Also, not just the gas of the farm, it adds within the supply chain. So we know that it's adding to the price of food because it goes up, for the trucker, the farm, where the fertilizer is coming from, where the all of the inputs, the carbon tax is on. So it is very much cumulative, and the farms are feeling it, and they have to absorb all these costs.
Is there it may not be a common thing, but what's the most common fuel used in heating the greenhouses? Is it
Point of order, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to ask you, what is the relevance to a discussion on seasonal workers and EI? What's the relevance to this discussion?
The motion is on it's broad. It's on workers in the seasonal industry and the employment insurance program. I will allow you to continue.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Chair. I thought it was sufficient enough that the witness who is volunteering her time to be here brought the issue up, and
this is on seasonal economy and workers in it, but yeah, it was.
And I think the witness did point out too. Thanks, Mr. Chair, that the seasonal nature of Canada, seasonal work, but also the cost of operating seasonally is impacted as well. But sorry, back to my point before we were so rudely interrupted. I want to get back to the types of fuels that are used. Is it propane is probably the most common fuel that's used in?
A lot of times natural gas.
Okay.
Yeah, natural gas. So some farms have converted from propane to natural gas.
Can you? So that's obviously a massive impact, this carbon tax. But I'm wondering about another tax. I talk a lot about housing because that's my portfolio, and it's really a passion of mine as well, and the impacts of these costs on investment in housing. But the government also made some changes recently to the capital gains inclusion rate, making it a bigger bit of a tax grab. Has that had an impact on your industry as well?
Yes, across the board in all of agriculture, including mushroom farms. I know the Canadian Federation of Agriculture has provided some good information on that for, I think, their budget submission, something like that. But yes, it's had, because the mushroom farms will, be passed on from the family, within the family, like all other farms. So, yeah, that is having an impact as well.
So for my Liberal friends who are concerned about relevance here, I'm assuming that the bigger the costs and the bigger the impacts of these huge tax grabs, the fewer seasonal employees you can afford to hire.
That is true. Yeah. That is true.
Someone doesn't believe that, I guess, but that's okay. Is there also an issue then related to all of these extra charges and fees and taxes? Is debt becoming an issue for your industry? Are members, farms incurring more and more debt?
Yeah, I don't have the statistics on that, but it would make sense because they're absorbing, they're price takers, not price makers. It's the grocery stores that should set the price for the mushrooms, for example. So they have to absorb all of the costs, inflationary costs that have been increasing the last few years.
I gave you additional time because of the point of order. We will go to Mr. Fragas-Kettos for 5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Donc, c'est non-jeu.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. These issues are very important to our committee, particularly, as was mentioned, I will follow along with Ms. Chabot. I would like to give her my time for this particular round. Madame Chabot, you have the... Well, thank you. You're quite right. This is a very significant report. Well, for me, but I mean, not just for me. I think that most seasonal sector workers in Quebec and elsewhere in Canada are living through situations which, over time, is such that the employment insurance regime is not meeting the needs economically of these various regions. So we have to acknowledge the reality that is facing these employees. This black hole is significant. People might say, well, they just have to find another job between seasonal work. Well, that's not the reality of seasonal workers in general. These seasonal jobs can never be converted into full-time employment because of the nature of the climate, etc. Some assistance has to be provided to regions who are systematically laid off for long periods. And the only part of the safety net that we could improve right now is the insurance employment. And that's the objective of our report, I believe. I hope that you agree with that perspective, and I thank you very much for having given me some time to pose the question to our witnesses who represent the seasonal workers in the first panel, where it spoke of the 5 extra weeks in the pilot project established in 2018. If it did respond to a certain requirement then, a certain context, it's no longer adequate. How can we improve concretely, functionally, this particular project or even the system as a whole? It's a basic system as to the financing of employment insurance benefits for these workers. So, Ms. McCallum, what do you think of that? How can we substantially improve the number of weeks of employment admissibility or weeks to be admissible or other criteria for 420 hours was mentioned, and taking into account, without taking into account a generalized unemployment rate for that region?
So make EI more accessible. Over time, fewer and fewer workers are able to access EI. The flight attendants, actually, if they're not getting paid, then those aren't insurable hours for EI. So that's going to affect their EI eligibility. Having that lower entrance requirement, having a floor, improving the training within. So there are transitions happening, and training is appropriate for some people. For example, digital literacy. For workers over the age of 45, actually, CUPE has a lot of workers who, since the pandemic, when stuff has been more digitalized, are really struggling. So improving our digital literacy training, that increases productivity. So that's really important. That's something that we're really looking at right now. And improving the voice of workers and employers. During the consultations from ESDC, there were a number of measures that employers and workers agreed on that haven't been implemented yet. This all does require money, so increasing the premium, it's at an all-time low right now, and the return that we get on that investment is very high. So we want the biggest bang for our buck. That's one place to put it, is training and in getting people access to the program. Because if it's a great program but nobody can get it, then it doesn't really matter. And this matters, again, for climate change, because climate change is going to affect those seasonal industries, and it's going to change. There's going to be transition. So having that support in place is really, really important. I just also wanted to make a note on the capital gains tax. Capital gains comes into effect when you sell an asset, so it wouldn't affect your ongoing operation costs. That's why I made the face.
Merci. En complément.
Thank you. Supplementary question then. It should be of interest to all parties around the table here. The employment insurance regime is federal jurisdiction, and it was established as such as a social security net for workers. You know, worst case scenario, they lose a job. And for seasonal employment, it's a foreseen period of loss of job for a certain period of time. So we're sort of marginalizing those people. Would you agree with me? Both witnesses, in fact, may respond that we must improve the employment insurance, the EA regime. Ms. McEwen.
Firm believer. So I've worked on EI for the past 12 years, and I'm a firm believer that EI is supposed to be a social insurance system, and it has benefits for the individual, but its primary purpose is for the economy as a whole. It helps us through transitions faster. It helps us cut off recessions. So I was talking to my daughter about this last night, who's 16 and has just taken her civics class, and she got it right away. If those first layer of people that get laid off have some income supports, have some access to training, then you stop the transmission there. If they don't get that support, they stop spending money, and then other businesses suffer and go out of business because people aren't spending money in those businesses. So this supports seasonal industries. It supports seasonal regions with a lot of seasonal work. And it's a really important part of a functioning economy, and it hasn't really matched up with our economy for a long time now. And so we're due for a real overhaul. There are some things that we can do to improve it in the immediate term, but we do want to rethink and make sure that it's not outdated. We don't have, not everybody works 9 to 5, Monday to Friday in full-time long-term career jobs. So our economy has changed, our workforce has changed, and if we want to have a productive economy that can make it through these transitions, EI is a really critical part of that.
But Ms. Cirillo for 2.5 minutes to conclude.
Thank you. And again, thank you so much for the witnesses to be here today. And I see that you can see that how difficult it is to get women's issues on the table, especially as it relates to labor. So I appreciate all the testimony you've had today. Witness McEwen, you mentioned about getting pregnant after being laid off, and I'm actually dealing with that right now in Port Moody, Coquitlam. A Rogers worker that was laid off and then got pregnant and has no access to EI by 20 hours. 20 hours, and the government has refused twice. My staff has asked twice, and I'm on now writing a letter for that because it's just so unfair. Witness McEwen, you've also written about the intersection between labor and climate change and seasonal workers, and you're quoted as saying, in relation to flight attendants, the pay starts when the plane backs away from the terminal. So if there are delays where they are sitting at the terminal because of these extreme weather events, flight attendants are working. They are having to help get people water for much longer periods of time, and they're not getting paid. What do you think about the fact that they're not able to pay and the intersection with climate change now? And we're getting into a very busy travel season.
Oh, absolutely. I didn't know that before I started working at CUPE, and because we represent some of those workers, that's how I learned about it. And then I was sitting on a runway in Winnipeg for 3 hours because there was a lightning storm, and these flight attendants are dealing with like very legitimately frustrated people, right? So it's not only that they're doing their job, they're doing a very difficult job for an indeterminate amount of time, and they don't know when they're going to start getting paid. And so it's very frustrating. It has other implications, as I mentioned, for those hours that they're working, but they're not paying into EI, they're not paying into a pension, they're not getting like credit for benefits. It really makes it very precarious, especially for younger women coming in who may be trying to get parental leave and to get those benefits. So, yeah, it's definitely. I was very surprised that the labor code is still that way and that it hasn't been changed. Yeah.
And just in relation to that, the minister of labor has said that it's not their job to protect workers in the labor code. What is your interpretation of what the labor code is for in federally regulated industries?
Yeah, my interpretation of the labor code is it is to protect workers.
Madam Zerillo, that concludes, we're at 1 o'clock and close to 1. That will conclude the second hour. I want to thank the witnesses for attending and doing. The committee will meet again on Tuesday, November the 5th. Is it the will of the committee to adjourn? Adjourn.